Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this webinar hosted by the Kenya Medical Association and supported by EVOS on policy advocacy. This is part of our series within the Young Reseachers Academy, and we are building sexual and reproductive health researchers to carry out research and fill the gap that exists in terms of evidence so that we are better advocate for policy. Today we have Dr. Nelly Bosive, who I'd say is a policy expert, policy advocacy expert. She's done a lot of policy advocacy in health, and she has worked closely with Capricorn during the championing evidence-based advocacy. She is also a sexual and reproductive health expert, and we are happy to have her for this session. Dr. Nelly, karibu sana, and thank you for being a part of our facilitators for the Young Reseachers Academy.
Thank you very much, Dr. Brenda. I'm very happy to be here. Thank you, all of you, for joining in today's webinar and participating with us. We started off last week, and we kind of laid the foundation for where we are heading today, working through advocacy, basically what I call the Advocacy 101, the things that we need to know about advocacy. And we finished that off talking about understanding our stakeholders and doing a stakeholder mapping. So today we're going to pick it up to the next level where we're going to talk about advocacy tools. And I'm hoping that we'll be together through the next 1 hour. Then we can have question and answer right at the end. So allow me to share my screen so that I can be able to just take us through that. Okay. Just trying to get the slideshow to start. There. So we're going to go through advocacy tools and identifying processes for change. So stay with me on this, where we're starting with what is an advocacy tool, which is basically an activity that influences your stakeholders by communicating your message in a way that has an impact or will convince them of the need for policy change. So I guess from that and looking at the kind of stakeholder groupings that we were having conversations about last week, then you realize that different stakeholders will require different tools to be able to communicate to them. There's no one size fits all, and it's best customized to who your audience at that time is. So in terms of looking at putting these tools to use and the impact chain that you want to look at, we start with the activities, which is where we are using our tools, and we want to see what output our activities are going to generate, and what is the outcome of these outputs, and eventually how does this lead us to achieving the goal that we set out to do. So whenever you're having a conversation with your decision makers or the people that policy advocacy is being advocated to, we usually say, do not look at barriers. Like I always say, there's no such thing as a difficult patient. They're just a patient undergoing very difficult circumstances. The same applies to our decision makers, that if you're not able to meet them at your point of need, then our advocacy will really not work. So when you look at the decision maker and they don't know what the problem is, tell them. Don't assume they know. A lot of the times they may even come across as if they know, but they really don't. So tell them, let them know. When the decision maker knows about it, but they don't like your proposed solution, again, go and do research, provide evidence as to why your proposed solution is actually possibly one of the best ways that can be able to bring a solution to this issue that is before us. When the decision maker doesn't have enough time or the money to solve it, work in a coalition. Again, partnerships. You have to be ready to build partnerships to bring solutions to work. A lot of the time, the government is going to tell you your solution is perfect, but looking at how much we need to spend on it, we do not have that in our budgets. This is where, we should be able to have capacity to network. And one of the most impactful things as a policy advocate you can do is to build a network of people who can also help you provide solutions. That's why I say you must be able to know these stakeholders that you want to implement change don't always have to be the ones who are making the change. They can actually be the ones who support the change maker to implement it. So again, find these coalitions that work so that you can be able to push your agenda forward. When there are those opposing interests asking the decision maker to do the opposite of what you're advocating for, we have to learn to use the media, because the media basically shouts about the problem, draws attention to the problem, and therefore people begin to see it differently. So those who may be opposing it then find themselves in a situation where they do not want to be seen to be talking against what the public needs. And finally, one that we will deal with all the time is when there's no political gain to be made from it. Now you have to engage your champions at different levels. And remember, champions may not always be the people who understand the problem best. They may not necessarily be the technical support group, but they are interested enough in the problem and therefore become your champions because they have capacity to influence the decision maker, but they may not have the technical know-how or the information. So then you come through for them by arming them with the correct skills and information, the correct knowledge and information. They have their facts right down, and when they approach the decision makers, they may actually be able to influence them correctly. So some of the tools that we engage, we have media, which I'm sure a lot of us have used in the past or have been recipients of. And the media's biggest objective is to raise awareness among the general public because it allows you to reach large audiences at once. And so some of the activities you can do using this particular tool are, as you can see, press conferences, radio shows, TV interviews, publishing newspaper articles, open letters, and things like that. We have coalition and network building, which we've talked about. So wherever you're working in your space, if you're advocating for SRHR, one of the strongest things you need to know is who else is in this space. How many other civil societies are working in this space, and always be part of that or bring them together, because together then you're able to amplify the voices even much louder. So meet the CSOs and learn on aligning positions, because sometimes you're all working towards the same end, but your language is so different that the decision maker may get confused. They do not understand what is being communicated. Next is relationship building. And I think we've talked about this. Who build relationships with your decision makers or your champions so that you're able to communicate the issues at hand. You're able to push your agenda forward to understand why there's need for policy change or full implementation of existing policies that probably are not being implemented. So it means you have to meet them. Sometimes you have to host events where you anticipate they are going to be. For instance, we do things like, as particularly professional associations, we take part in celebrating, things like World Health Days and stuff. And then we invite these decision makers to grace these occasions, because once they're there, then it is easy to get them to commit to the journey that you're taking. And then we have the policymaker engagements where we do policy education. Again, this becomes, meeting the actual decision makers and having conversations about these matters at hand. Sometimes you may have to attend government meetings yourself so that you are the voice of information from a technical perspective. You may actually meet with them during their own sessions. For instance, when the parliamentarians are asking for stakeholder engagement, let's say with regard to proposed laws, then attending these events and taking a moment to come through as a professional or as a professional organization, giving feedback, it becomes an opportunity for policy education. And finally, use of the briefs and the policy briefs that we have been we had mentioned from the beginning. Then finally, policy analysis and research. This basically takes you back to desk reviews and things to look at what is the existing evidence, how is it changing, what do we need to address even as we go to, and especially this makes a lot of sense when you have a policy that's about to expire, for instance, and you have, let's say, like now we talked about MDGs up to 2015. And if you look at the run up to 2015, through 2012, 2013, 2014, we were having a lot of conversations about the MDGs and what we had not achieved and why had we not achieved them. So that by the time we got to 2015 and we're doing a review, an end of term review, and coming up with now the SDGs, then we were coming from a point of better information to say we didn't meet our targets. What were the issues? How do we make the stakeholders aware? How do we make the decision makers aware of what the issues really were and why we were unable to attain our SDG goals? And then through that, you're able to now say our SDGs have to be better informed. And for you to get there, you have to have done thorough policy analysis. You have data at hand. You have, if we're talking about, let's say, prevention of maternal death, we know we haven't done well. Currently, our conversations towards SDG, 2030, we're looking at why are we stagnating? Why is Kenya not moving forward? Why are we stuck and we are not making progress towards the less than 70 maternal mortalities per 100,000 live births as we expected to have been doing? So we cannot get to 2030 and then now we sit around and look. And this is now where we start early. We start putting out all these policies. We are really taking opportunity to say, deadline is coming. We haven't achieved what we intended to achieve. We do need to have some policy change so that we are able to attain our targets. And finally, engagement of the stakeholders. And as I said, so different policy tools target different stakeholders. So for instance, at community level, we'll be looking at using things like the media, because you're doing mass education, we're doing demand creation. We want people to understand, oh, we have a NHIF, we're moving to shift. What does it guarantee you? So that then they're able to effectively participate even when it comes to stakeholder engagement. County political and global level. Remember, we will be talking a lot about what's happening at county level and how our counties implementing policies that most of the time they did not make. So that engagement can actually take a lot of policy education, and our policy briefs come through when the county is probably not the one responsible, for instance, for determining how we are managing, let's say, free maternity. And what happens then? They just know there's this money that will be paid, but you need to come back down to them and educate them on why is it important to get them as a county to push for enrollment into NHIF of their own people. So it's those kinds of things that at county level, you may actually have to open that door. Remember, counties are still fairly new. They're still settling in. A lot of the times, the people in positions of leadership may not necessarily be the most skilled or the most qualified. So they do rely a lot on advocacy to actually help guide which way the policy of the country should go. At national level, we, I think, have been involved heavily, all the way from Parliament at the level of bill creation to the Ministry of Health level at the policy level creation, and even how we implement some of these things. I think in the year 2024, there has been heavy engagement of KMA through the development of the Social Health Insurance Fund, the SHA. We had the Digital Health Act, which we are still having conversations about. We already had the FIF Act, which we had been advocating for many years, even before it was eventually brought to Parliament as a unifying bill for all counties. So those are some of the conversations that at national level we always get involved in. Regional level, there are a lot of things that we have agreed to. Kenya has been signatory to at the regional level. For instance, the Maputo protocols in SRH. And there is that continued engagement to say Kenya is a signatory to this. We need to fully adopt the protocols that we signed up on. Then at a global level, things like how we handle COVID. Now we're talking about Mpox. So these are things that we need to continually have that conversation, not just at a regional level, but also at a global level, because we are coming in saying we are Africa. We are probably a developing country. Our challenges are going to be very different. So when you're making these policies, we need to understand that they address us too sufficiently and not policies made for other people. Alternatively, we always have to remember again, a lot of SRHR, the challenge we actually get at global level is that we have this dumping down of a lot of our policies so that they fit into the so-called developing world. But a lot of the time you find that when you really critically analyze some of the policies, they actually come through as poor medicine for poor people. So our voices have to be heard for us to challenge such dogma and such stigma and ensure that we're actually having policies that also treat our people the same and ensure that if you're providing SRHR, for instance, it is what is the highest attainable standard of care and not because we're really trying to make it fit into a certain budget. Because remember, if you don't aim for the stars, then you really are not even going to make it to 10th floor. And that is it's these policies that will literally create a push towards saying, okay, we committed that this is how we are going to provide care. And that means we have to figure out where the money is coming from or how much allocation is going to have to go into the full implementation of this policy. So in the policy process, then you want to identify the policy change processes because as we say, each of these levels will have different processes. You will engage groups at different stages and each of them is responsible for a specific aspect of policy change. If you remember when we're going through the policy cycle, there's a lot of spaces where you always start by creating demand, which means you have to say we have a gap. And then use that to push to say we need a policy development or a policy change from what is already existing. And by this time, by the time we go through this full circle, and knowing that in Kenya, we are a country where, yes, our constitution says that you must have stakeholder engagement. We're working towards meaningfully engaging our stakeholders, not just checking a box that in this lawmaking process or this policy making process, we met this constitutional requirement, even when it is not reasonable. So that's where the different levels come in. Who needs to hear what so that the whole, cogwheel is moving as a well-oiled machine. There are policy change opportunities, but remember what you said, you have to be very, very good at prioritizing. Prioritization always comes first. And remember the opportunities in which you feed in is always understanding the policy process, understanding the existing government processes and knowing where do you fit in, okay? If we want to have government do investment in the year 2025, 2024, 2025, we already know that we've missed that boat because our finance act has gone. We don't even have one. So we should be looking forward to, by the time we're coming up with the next finance act for 2025, 2026, what is it we want to push government to commit to? And therefore, the advocacy for ensuring that this is actually enshrined in the budget has to start now. When you're talking about policies, and because we are doing SRHR, one of the things you will realize is that a lot of what Kenya has gone through, especially in the last 2 decades, is that there has been a sudden awareness of especially reproductive health rights. And what has that led to? It has led to an attempt at creating laws and policies that support or protect SRHR. But in that space, we've also had a lot of resistance from people who will have their own personal opinions of how things will be done. They may carry the church with them, they may carry different social groups with them, and they have really heavily been against any process that we're making. So when we're talking about knowing where your opportunities fall, for instance, if we want to come up with an act of parliament that enshrines SRHR, and we know that we're going to face heavy resistance, the one thing you know for a fact is that there is no president who's going to support you when he is very close to a re-election period, because they do not want to ruffle the waters. So the best time to approach this possible act is to want to start this process immediately the president comes into office, immediately, so that even if he faces resistance and he is with us on this, that he's able to sign this bill into an act probably by the 2nd year of being president, or latest by the end of the 2nd year or early 3rd year. That gives this person 2.5 years for people to even forget that they were angry with him for passing a certain bill and they move on swiftly. So you have to start understanding those kinds of things and knowing when is my best shot. As we come together as advocates, as CSOs, as everybody else, stakeholders working in this space, when is our best shot? So what are the existing government processes? One thing most people do not know is that if you take a bill to Parliament, and that bill lives in Parliament for the duration of the existence of the Parliament that is in place, if it is not passed into an act before the life of that Parliament comes to an end, in the next Parliament, you can't pick up where you left off. It has to come back and be introduced as a whole new bill. And this is what we've gone through trying to get the reproductive health bill passed in Parliament for the last 3 parliaments. We're still here. We still do not have a reproductive health bill. Reproductive Health Act. We still do not have an IVF or Assisted Reproductive Technologies Act, all because of the kind of resistance they have been evoking. And every time we start this process, it goes on round and round in circles. Parliament's life comes to an end. We go back for fresh elections. We come back with a fresh batch of members of Parliament. We have to reintroduce this bill in Parliament afresh, which means finding a member of Parliament who's willing to do this all over again. So this is where we have to understand what our opportunities look like. So understand the existing government processes with regard to policy development, policy implementation, and that applies to all the way to the parliamentary bills and acts. Look at the existing events and see how to ride on them. What kind of standing meetings take place that you can go into? For instance, if you want to address the county governments and their governors, you need to think about, there's always an annual devolution congress. How do we fit into that annual devolution congress and highlight SRHR issues where the largest gathering of devolved units is present, because they are the implementers of policy at the end? Significant national events, the Gen Zs showed us this. They did a fantastic job with the shelving the Finance Act, because they knew when to strike. And if you saw, the demonstrations were always targeting the day this matter is going to be hand first reading, second reading, third reading, because that's the time that it's actually impactful. And then global and regional days also come in. We're now thinking about, we want to elect the AU chair or want to do this kind of, so anything that you feel you can ride on some of those things, it's a now or never. Right now with SRHR, we're heading towards the end of our SDGs. We are in 2024, we have 6 years to implement anything useful. So right now, the pressure to make sure that we meet our targets is mounting. And this is where we can fit in and say, look, as part of SDG 3, we have to fit in SRHR rights, because it is the SDG that is fully addressing rights. And that's an opportunity to make sure that we're not missing out. And that brings us then to our policy briefs. And a lot of us will ask, what is a policy brief? It's a short document that literally word for word summarizes key important things for a non-specialist audience when you're talking about matters of importance that you're advocating for. So we're scientists, and we are going to publish our fancy research, our randomized clinical trials. We're going to publish our fantastic implementation science research. But the person you're talking to is not a healthcare provider, is not in the healthcare space. They don't get it. So if you have to really explain to them why, for instance, it is important for them to consider hiring 1,000 midwives for the county because the numbers are dismal, and this is why we are having bad outcomes and maternal mortality rates are very high in that county, then you understand why it must be communicated in a language they can understand. So think about having a patient in front of you who's having aortic dissection and requires emergency surgery, and they do not know what an aorta is. In fact, to the layman, they don't know there's an artery and a vein. Then they just know everything is called a vein. So you have to start explaining to this person in a language they understand what aortic dissection is, and therefore why the surgery is needed, why it is urgent, and what kind of surgery is going to be done. If you can break it down to your 75-year-old grandmother in the room before they give you informed consent, then you really know how to write a policy brief. Because that's exactly what you're doing. You're trying to filter this study that is probably 4 or 5 pages long when you have looked at the abstract, and you want to sieve it in a language that your decision maker is going to understand, heavily bringing out the key important data that will guide them to make decisions, but not in such a scientific language that you're unable to grasp what you're talking about. So it's literally a vehicle for providing your policy advice, and it is targeted to specific people. So policy briefs are actually written and tweaked for the audience. What you're going to give a member of parliament will sound different from what you're going to give a governor, is going to sound different to what you're going to talk about when you're going to the community, for instance. And all of these people, the base data is the same. The study being quoted is the same. However, the language in which it's put is what matters based on the audience that you're going to talk about. And for that, then we say the three key, most important things you have to want to ensure your policy brief speaks to. Is it relevant? Who's your target audience? What is relevant to them? And this is now going to determine the language in which you phrase it. So how does it inform either an ongoing conversation? Because as I said, we are going to ride on existing government processes to make our entry into the space where we're trying to influence policy. So if somebody is now talking about economic development in their county, and that is the key thing that they're riding on, then you really have to figure out how you are going to bring SRHR conversations relevant to how a strong, healthy population with regard to SRHR is a contributor to economic development of the country. So using that, then you're able to use the existing research data to inform the why. Why do you say so? What facts and figures are present? So it has to be relevant to the person who is responsible for implementing the policy in the first place. Number two, it must be relatable. So we cannot be talking about recommendations that the person cannot grasp because within their context, it's completely misplaced. Okay, so they have to be sort of like a continuation of what's already going on. What are you working on and how do we fit this in as part of what you're working on, especially when you're looking at the political environment. We know governors are here for a short while, 5 years, maximum 10 years. Everyone comes in, they have their own agenda. It may not align to an agenda you think is responsible, but you have to always find how do you relate what you're advocating for to fit into this person's agenda that they already have put in place. And finally, it must resonate with them. Is the language accessible? Are you being too scientific that they cannot understand you? Is there a human face to this? Are you able to say 1 in 5 girls and tell them, like your daughter, 15-year-old, who needs to access information on reproductive health? And that brings it down, to one-on-one, putting a human face to that, making it easy for people to relate to the person in the room rather than actual facts and figures that they cannot put a face to, and also just giving an opportunity for you to give them a window into the reality of the situation. And that's why some of these events make a lot of sense. For instance, if you're talking about supporting breastfeeding on World Breastfeeding Day, and you're talking about facts and figures about nutrition, and this person is completely unable to relate, the conversation will be very different if you have 20 breastfeeding mothers in the room who work in various job industries and can easily relate to this person saying, I'm a supermarket attendant. I need to breastfeed my baby exclusively, but there's no county policy mandating my employer, who is the owner of the supermarket, to give me 30 minutes time out every 3 or 4 hours to breastfeed my baby. So that then becomes a whole lot more resonant with the person in the room because they're talking to their potential voter. And the only language they understand is vote. So make it resonate with them. Finally, what is your policy brief telling you? What is the problem being addressed? The research question. This is the reason why in the first place research was done. Those findings are there, but are those findings talking to, are you able to really say those findings have spoken to the problem? Because if they have not, then you need to go back to the drawing board and do a better desk review of existing data to see which answers your question. And the findings, what are they saying? What are they answering? What questions are they telling you? What were the results? The brief highlights of the most important findings. Okay. If in this county it is access to SRH services, for you to say we only have 2 youth centers in a county population of 900,000 people, of which 200,000 are aged 11 to 19, and they need access to these services. That brings it home. And you can even further say, these are their locations. This is the average distance a young person will have to commute to make it to a youth center. That makes it relevant, but brief in a language that they understand. And what is the proposed way forward? So are we having a policy that has already addressed this problem? It's just not being implemented, which means now advocacy is based on how do we put in resources to ensure that we are able to fully implement this policy. Or we do not have a policy, or the policy in place is completely outdated. It's no longer speaking to the population at hand, and therefore we actually need a whole policy change. Finally, engaging the media is something that is very critical for any person who is in policy advocacy. And the reason for this is that, remember what we said, that one of the easiest ways to push for a policy to be implemented is to create a demand first for the service. And therefore people then are in a space where they're saying, okay, we need this service availed to us, but you cannot avail this service without having certain policies in place that speak to the service. So media becomes our ally. And a lot of us have engaged with the media, but sometimes what we struggle with is fully exploiting the opportunity of engaging with the media for us to be able to get what we are looking for. So one of the things the media helps you with is to be able to reach large audiences, as we have spoken, within a short period of time. And we talk about working with the traditional media. We talk about working with social media, which we have access to currently, at least fairly unrestricted. So it gives us room to do a lot with regard to information dissemination, with public education, and of course, even being able to inspire the masses to see where you're coming from and join you. I mean, we have seen a whole generational change take place on social media in the last few months. And that just goes on to speak to the power of the media in the first place. It's also very effective when you are trying to break down information that is otherwise regarded as very complex to the general population. But then you have a platform where you can easily speak to them and break it down in a language they understand, to be able to first of all, get rid of myths, get rid of misinformation, and be able to provide the actual information as it is. And of course, then for you to do that, you need to have really planned this out really, really well, strategize so that there is maximum use of the same. So why do we engage the media? It helps us to reach out to key stakeholders. There's nothing that traumatizes politicians more than you putting them all out there about how they're not doing this or not doing that or whatever. And you've seen that, whether it's in mainstream media or social media, when facts are being quoted, when figures are being shown, when we are talking about, for instance, wastage of public resources, and we actually have evidence being put out on social media, the communications that makes it a very, very powerful tool. It's a key tool in advocacy and change, and I think we have seen that. It, of course, makes public attention. We know generally the public has a very short attention span. So they're not going to be listening to the same thing over and over and over. However, for the 5-10 minutes, for the 5 days, for the 5 weeks that their attention is solely glued on this matter, it's an opportunity for a massive sway of public opinion. So it becomes then an opportunity now to force the hand of the decision maker to be able to comply simply because they do not have a choice. The whole public is ganged up against them. Next, it also helps us to build long-term relationships. So you do not want to start a media campaign to disappear. You need consistency, and therefore, when you start engaging with the media, what you're looking to do is build a long-term relationship. That may not make a lot of sense for the young people with the mainstream media, but I am sure you all understand social media when we say consistency in your posting, in your branding, is what results in huge following and therefore makes it easier for you to continuously influence the public. It doesn't matter what you use it for. You see, the media is a tool that anybody can latch on. So your job is to be there to provide the correct information consistently. Because if you're not doing it, somebody else somewhere is continuously providing information to an audience that is hungry for information, and they may actually be misinforming them in the long run. So when you're trying to engage with the media, your goal is to reach as large a population as you possibly can, disseminate information, educate, and you're educating everyone from the stakeholder to the decision maker, to the champions and influencers who are in a position to influence the policy decision maker. You're throwing light to issues that are poorly understood. We saw this during COVID, for instance. Everybody was scared. They did not know about what was going on. And there was a few people who came through, always providing consistent information about what we are dealing with and what we expect and what our how the public should prepare themselves. Next is to empower your stakeholders to contribute to public debates, because once you start a conversation, many people are now able to latch onto the same conversation, and that continues to sway public opinion. And even those who weren't bothered by the conversation may actually now start paying attention to the conversation simply because they can't seem to get away from it. Everywhere they turn, it is the only conversation that is going on. And that way, then we initiate new public discourse. And this is part of our, array of arsenal that helps us in advocacy. And we know the various tools that we have in media. We have print material, which we can use, fact sheets, and we have seen sometimes, for instance, if you look at the Healthy Nation, every time there is celebration of an important day, they will actually do a whole spreadsheet of their center page, and they put in all the facts, figures, interviews, expert opinions, just to kind of highlight the specific event. And that's some of the ways in which we can use that. So presentations are big now. We do them all the time using graphics, visual aids. We're here doing virtual engagements, live engagements, conference seminars, all of it coming together. Use of TVs and radios. And what most people do not know, we may have a lot of disregard for radio, but despite the advent of social media, nothing beats radio yet in terms of reach. Your radio station is going to have a much wider reach than your TV ever will. And it is going to be reaching population, especially when you're targeting demand creation. And if you actually go to the villages, you're going to find everybody listens to the radio inadvertently, even when they're not paying attention to it. The boda guy is always blaring the radio. So all the passengers they're going to carry, they're going to have to listen to this radio, whether they like it or not. There's the old guy who is in his farm and his radio is hanging from a tree. Whether you want to hear it or not, you're going to keep hearing all of this information. So a very powerful tool when we're reaching out, especially to the rural communities, because we may be in a space where we have a lot of exposure to TV and social media, and we think that that's it. But the majority of the population, and that's why you will see towards elections, all our politicians suddenly remember how to speak their mother tongue. And they show up in all of the local vernacular radio stations because they are actually talking to the people who vote. And they know that those people can only be found through the radio. And finally, digital media, which is really big in our spaces now, lots of educational content sharing. We know every conference going on everywhere in the world because whoever is attending is going to post it on LinkedIn. We're going to see it on Twitter. Every professional association, every formal organization seriously does not feel like it's existing without Twitter or X, whatever we call it now. But you get the point that social media has really moved away from just being a socializing tool and, laid back, easygoing, and now is actually a major tool for information dissemination, being seen, being heard, being known for what your message is, and maintaining that consistency of your message so that people then know you for what you stand for. And so in terms of the media engagement, you always must be very clear about what your issue is, so that when you're going there to speak, you're not talking about 50 things at the same time. The public is not used to having to, jump all over the place. So today, if we're talking about FGM, it is FGM. We focus on FGM. So be clear about the issue you want to address today. Who is your target audience? Because your target audience then determines what media outlet you need to use. And finally, what is the content that you need to put across and how you're going to execute this. Eventually, now we have the capacity to do analytics. We're able to even determine how wide our audience reach was and whether this media engagement was useful or not. So think about your issue, as we have said, clearly identify your topic. What do you really want to communicate and how do you want to achieve that? We talked about that target. What do they like? What do they dislike? What language do they speak in so that you are able to relate to them? So if you're going to talk to an audience that is heavily shame speaking and you really cannot even when they ask you a question, you're unable to answer because you cannot even understand the question in the first place, then probably you may need somebody else to address that target audience. If you're going to talk to women and mothers who are, let's say we're talking about something like breastfeeding, your probable best channel is going to be TV, and you're probably going to do this in the morning shows when most of the time is when they are home, they're laid back, and they really are more likely to be watching TV. But if you want to have a conversation with your politician about an issue that you think is a big deal, then you really must be on the primetime news at 9 p.m. because at 9 p.m., every elected person in this country is watching news. They need to know the government might turn while they were looking aside for 1 minute. So they all assemble, and wherever they are, the world stops because at 9 o'clock, they need to know what is the headlines, where are we today, what language do I need to speak? So you need to know your audience so that you know which outlet, how do they engage? Because if you want to talk about something very serious, we are unlikely to be having a very serious conversation when you are on Classic 105 in the morning with Maina and Kinani. It is widely listened to, but may not necessarily reach your target audience or present your message the way you want to. So you have to think about that. Are these the people who speak about the issue that you're bringing? So are they known for that? Or are you going to be introducing a totally different topic that's a fish out of water and even your audience is confused as what are we talking about today? This isn't why we come to listen to this radio. So you must think about that through and through. If you're going on social media, what information you can put on TikTok is definitely going to be packaged very differently from what you're going to put on LinkedIn. Because again, who's your target audience? So it determines what media you use. When we're talking about content, create it high. Always keep your audience in mind. Your message must always remain relevant to them. What hooks their attention is not the same that will hook them, even if the topic is the same. If we're talking about SRHR today, the conversation that will get doctors listening to SRHR is very different from the conversation that is going to take 17, 18-year-old college students is going to be very different from 40-year-old women when you're still talking about SRHR. It's all the same. But what about the topic is of interest to them at that point? So for you to be able to do that, you have to understand them, be very concise, talk a language that they speak to, and always you must remain credible. Whoever you're quoting as your sources must be sources that cannot be challenged. Finally, execution. Know who you want to approach. If it's a TV show, what media outlet is most likely to hold the audience that you want to speak to? If you want to talk to the people in the village where language barrier might be an issue, where they're in very remote areas, you know you're stuck with KBC because it is the only TV station that literally has reach in all the weirdest parts of this country where nobody else goes because all other stations are there for commercial purposes. So they're not going to be investing in talking to somebody who is in, let's say, in the back of Beyond in Marsabit. But you will find there's a very powerful KBC booster there. So if you want to talk to those people, this is your media. If you want to talk to your high-end, middle class people, then you really are going to be on KTN or NTV because that is who you're talking to and that is what they watch. If you want to engage politicians and the wide reach, you're going to be on Citizen because that is where they prefer. So you really have to think it through. You know your medium, you understand the tone and style of the station, because again, there are some stations which if you took a certain topic there, it might actually be deemed offensive even by the listeners because that's not their forte. So you have to think through that. And then when we're done, we said conduct analytics. Conduct analytics because you must always be able to measure your advocacy journey. Am I making progress? Am I reaching my target audience? Or did I spend a whole day posting about this on X and maybe only 3 people even engaged with it? So maybe your target media, the media or the outlet that you're using may actually not be correct. And always have a media plan as an organization. This is something that we really underestimate. And a lot of us have just been swinging it through our professional organizations because we do not think about the consistency of communication. If you go to organizations like UNFPA, like JAPIGO, like that actually deal extensively with advocacy, you are going to see that there is literally an entire communication department that has a proper annual media engagement plan. Who are you talking to? And this is written down so that everybody in the organization is speaking the same language. So when you're working in that space, you need to have that plan because it describes the objectives you want to achieve for the year, what strategies you're using, which tactics are going to be used, which media house, which timelines, all those things in one place. Then you can use this to sensitize your journalists who you intend to work with, and gives you sort of a consistent plan to always remind you that you are on course, you have targets to achieve, and you're able to do your monitoring and evaluation and see which way you're going. You're also being able to capture the learnings as you continue to implement your media plan and figure out where you need to change, when you need to change. So media engagement can be tricky. Working with journalists is hard. And a lot of the times, especially when we want to communicate important advocacy messaging, we find that they're a necessary evil. So instead of looking at them as a necessary evil, we look at them as our partners who may have their own challenges. How do we alleviate their challenges so that they're there for us in a manner that we would like? Remember, you can have your journalist who does your health stories, and this one time they really just are unable to get around to doing something because they have a writer's block. It's normal. They may write a fantastic story, but they're not the ones who determine what's published. The editors do that. And the editors themselves may have their biases, which then might be the reason why, despite putting your best foot forward in your advocacy plan, it does not get to see the light of day. Every media house has a house style. You need to understand the house style so that you know how to relate or to even figure out whether this is a useful engagement for you to get involved in or not. Front page news, I can tell you stories have been written and the paper has gone to print and print has been stopped because we have a breaking news and therefore the front page has to change. So your big story makes it at best to page 4 or 5 because the first 3 pages are all consumed with the breaking news that has just hit. So you must be able to appreciate that and not hold it against them. Remember that a lot of the times, one of the biggest complaints doctors have is when the media are looking for somebody to have a conversation. And you're like, really now? You're asking me tonight for tomorrow morning? Like, I am a doctor. Don't you know I am busy? Yes, doctors are busy. Media house people are worse. They have tighter schedules than we have. And sometimes the notice is so short. So you have to really decide how important is your advocacy journey. How much are you willing to sacrifice not to lose the opportunity to have a conversation with these people? So in terms of you needing to sell your story where you can, if you really can know the media owner and put this person in your pocket, you are 10 steps ahead. Know the type of media house, what is the editorial policy, what is the editorial style, so that you align to that in your communications. Stories should be brief and memorable and very, very focused. Right now, evidence base is not only for us in science, even in the media house, they're really beginning to engage with evidence. And you will actually see quoting studies. So you cannot be going there without knowing what evidence you're best working with and use that. And remember this, the what do you intend to say? The why are you advocating for this? When, remember the key points we talked about, how to engage with government in the policy cycle so that you know when to best fit in. Where is this being done? And who is responsible for the decision making? Then we can have a conversation about the how. Always get straight to the point. The interesting thing about media is you go on a radio show and you're told you have 2 hours and you think, oh my God, what am I going to say for 2 hours? Nobody tells you you're going to talk for 20 minutes and the rest of the 2 hours is going to be spent playing music. So every moment the music pauses and you're going to discuss your next point, you can see how you really need to be on point with your points, quick, they are communicated before you get carried away with other conversations. Otherwise, you might talk the entire time and you really have not put across what took you there in the first place. Keep communication channels open. You cannot expect a journalist to be there for you when they look for you, you yourself, you're not found, you don't answer your calls, you don't respond to their questions. It is important because remember, we said we're building a continuous relationship for advocacy. Use third-party endorsements. So if we're having a conversation in SRHR about FGM, and we have an FGM, a surgeon, a gynecologist who repairs, FGM patients, have that person come because their conversation will be 10 times more impactful than yours ever will be when you're simply talking from a point of advocacy. Yet there's a person who here can actually give the lived experiences. Again, case studies and real life stories will always sell, always. They will sell better than true when you're just, packing up facts and figures. And that's why you see a lot of the times media houses will tell you, okay, today we are here to talk about menstrual health problems. And you are invited as the expert, but you will find that there's a patient there who is also there to relate their real life experience. There's probably going to be somebody who has been working in the advocacy space for longer than you, talking about what it is they've done for women and girls in Kenya this far. So it is important even for yourself to have a network of those people in the space in which you advocate for, so that even when the media house reaches out to you, say, oh, I also do have a real life story person who would be happy to come. Would you like to have us both? It strengthens your conversations, it strengthens your advocacy platform. Always have background information. Please have a nice picture when they ask you for it, because a lot of us will be like, oh yeah, let me just take a selfie and send, and we forget about the quality of the pictures. By the time it converts to from your phone to the poster that's gonna go out, it looks really bad. So it's important to have some of these things. Video evidence of work you have been doing, short clips of things that you can put out on social media. It's important to have those at all times, because sometimes you might just be the one to provide your journalist with a much more impactful visual of your advocacy than even words can sell. So what happens when we go to interviews? Again, a skill that we learn on the job, because nobody taught us these things, but it is important that when you are actually in front of the screen, you are there as an expert. And the first thing, because you're not seeing yourself, you're on the other side, is that down there they'll write Dr. XYZ, expert in ABC. So when you're coming there, everyone is expecting you to come with information. So first of all, always acknowledge the question. What are you being asked? What does this do for you? It actually makes sure that you're answering the correct question. Okay, so pick up phrases as you can see that you can then use to get onto answering the question. Then bridge that by continuing with a brief transition. So it's your opportunity. Don't just answer the question and stop, but use that question to open up and talk a little bit more about what you want to say with regard to the matter. Always remember that you have to communicate that key point. Like it has to come out that, you see, I'm here today for 30 minutes, but my key point is this. This is the most important reason why we're here today. This is why we need to have this conversation. And this is something you'll have to keep making reference to, even as the conversation goes on. The things that we don't know, because nobody tells us, when you're in that interview, if you don't want to answer, imagine you have a right to say so, because as I said again, when you're invited to the media house, sometimes you might not realize that you're not the only person. So you're here telling us about contraceptive access to young people, and you're very passionate about that. But then there is Dr. XYZ, who is also a Christian from the other end, who does not believe that sex before marriage should even be a conversation to be had. So when they come in, you are going to actually sometimes be asked questions that might actually either feel offensive or might be, putting you in an awkward situation. And you're actually free to say, I prefer not to answer that. And that's okay. And no is a complete sentence. If you also need to realize that journalists need to make the show entertaining. You might just be the one who is being used to make the show entertaining for that show. So you really do have to realize that once you're sitting on stage, you only have control over what you say. Not what the journalist says, not what the other panelists say, not even what the audience is sending in as questions. So you always have to talk. You need to come out from within you and say what brought you here, and mind not being distracted by other people. It helps to write down what you want to say before the interview. That way, even when it's going off on a tangent, you have something to center you and bring you back to what is it you came to talk about in the first place. Always identify the 3 key messages and keep returning to them. And you must believe in what you say. You always must believe in what you say. One of my biggest examples of being caught off guard in a TV interview was in 2013 when we had just gone into devolution and we had a nationwide health workers strike paralyzing health facilities across the country, something that had never ever happened in Kenya before, because it was everybody from doctors to nurses to clinical officers. People had to purchase new padlocks for gates of hospitals because some of them had never been locked for decades. And it was not nice because governors had just taken over devolution of health. They were trying to show the world they're here to work. The first order of business is that hospitals are closed, and we're being told, why are we protesting? Why are we refusing to be devolved? And here we are being told that, yes, constitutionally, we should be devolved. And it was an interesting panel to sit in because we had the cabinet secretary for health there. We had the parliamentary health committee chair was one of the governors. We had the chair of not the parliamentary, sorry, the council of governors. And we also had the council of governors chair of their labor committee. So it was, first of all, a very testosterone-laden panel. It was being hosted by a male news anchor. And I was probably the youngest person in the room, the only female. And everyone's looking at me as, you obstinate young doctors who do not want to be devolved. What is your problem, you know? And at this point, the governors had already gone to court and they had actually declared our strike illegal. So in fact, the reason why I was in the TV station and not the Secretary General is because we were avoiding getting served with the court ruling of declaring the strike illegal. And I remember the Hussein turned to me and said, so Daktari, the courts have declared the strike illegal. What are you going to do about it? And obviously you do not want to be seen as the person who is refusing to follow court orders, because you need the same court to stand for you with regard to the matters at hand that you're going on strike. And it was that one moment you feel like a deer caught in the headlights. But my deflection was very simple. And I was like, Dr. Hussein, would you tell me a court that has ever declared an industrial action in this country legal? And everybody went quiet, and that was the end of the interview. And I managed to get out of that tight situation like that. But the good thing is that 2 years down the line in the next industrial action, a judge actually declared that the industrial action is legal, and finally broke the trend where every court would automatically declare a health workers strike illegal. So it's one of those things. You have to really believe in what you say. You have to really learn to think on your feet, and you have to understand your subject matter, so that you know when you cannot twist the law and figure out smart ways out of it without compromising your conversation. Make sure you understand the question 100% before answering. Again, another problem. Sometimes we just answer without listening because you are ready to respond. However, you did not realize that the question may have been twisted differently, and now what is being asked is very different. And when you get smart at this, you actually learn to set your own questions. And I think our president has proven to be the master of that in his press conferences. You actually have to learn to not lose sight of your communication. Always remember you're the expert. Always remember everybody in the room will defer to your knowledge. So please be the expert. Don't embarrass us. Don't assume that all interviews are hostile. And where they may start out as hostile, always make it your job to bring the temperatures down. Remember that journalists are also human, so they also have their own opinion. You may be here advocating for, people to have access to abortion on demand, but the person who is interviewing you is completely anti-choice. So are you ready for being able to understand that, so that you are always prepared on how to handle them in the event this is the person sitting across from you in the room? And finally, it is important to know your journalist. What kind of interviews do they conduct? What kind of stream of conversation do they seem to have? What are their opinions? So that you're prepared and ready for this interview when you get there. With regard to social media, you'd probably be teaching us even more. We know all of the social media options that we have out there. There are quite many, but I think my quick summary will just be to the do's on social media: use visuals, pictures speak 1,000 words, and actually data shows that any social media post that has pictures receives 150% more attention than the ones that don't. Engage with your audience. So don't put a nice post out there, and then when your audience starts to engage with you, you're not there to respond. Be very thoughtful in what you share, because remember, you are sharing content. It reflects on you. It reflects on your organization. How do you want yourself to be perceived in this space? How do you want your organization to be perceived in this space? What is the goal of this advocacy that you are doing now? Because remember, advocacy, as I said, you haitaki uvivu, and there is nothing like you will get an instantaneous response. It's always an ongoing process. So whatever you are engaging in today must be sort of setting the stage for what you may want to say 2 years down the line. Be a regular poster so that people don't forget you, and they always sort of you become their default go-to for information with regards to such things. And of course, hashtags, I think we could not overemphasize them. What not to do, which again, you probably do know: do not repost the same message over and over and over again. You may be creative with the wording, you may repost it in a different way, you may actually say the same message, but say it differently, but don't be repetitive. Always make sure you have your facts right. You do not want to post and then you realize that, oh, that wasn't factual, then you're coming to take it down. And of course, now we know how social media never forgets. Somebody somewhere will have screenshot that and they will use it over and over against you. Don't be needy. Let people follow you because they believe in you. Do not prioritize quantity over quality. You do not always have to be seen. You just need to be impactful when you're finally seen. So the quality of what you post is more important than how many times are you out there. Remember, people hold you in very high regard. You are a doctor, you're highly educated, you are seen to be the one who speaks on behalf of everybody else. So please, you cannot have bad English. I'm sorry, but grammatical errors, poor English, it's an immediate put off, and it actually makes people not believe in you. So some of the social media hacks that are probably good to think about. Number one, what's your social media handle? Unfortunately, a lot of us get onto social media when we're still very young and not thinking very professionally. So you have very interesting handles that are in use. You may actually have to redo this all over again so that you maintain relevance and come across as professional. So your handle, keep it simple so that people are able to remember, but also try as much as possible to keep it professional. Your social media name, use the title. Use your title as is. I am Dr. XYZ. Do not give yourself titles you don't have. Profile pictures should be formal but warm and consistent across platforms. It really helps because people may remember your face, people may remember your handle, but once they see that face in a completely different social media space, they're likely to remember you, and therefore they're more likely to make reference to that. If you have accolades, please keep them authentic. If you have received an EBS from the president, please use it because you have it. Do not call yourself professor if you are not, because, well, again, internet has opened all doors and people do not want to brand you as a fake because they realize that you used a title that that does not belong to you yet. In terms of your content, showcase your passion. Remember, people relate to your passion, not the status that you lord over them. What are you passionate about? That's what they're going to come looking for you for, not because you're Dr. X or Professor Y or you hold a PhD in what. You can have all those things, but they only came to you because of something that you're passionate about. Then in terms of frequency, remember to keep it consistent. I like to use some of this as an example. Michelle Obama's picture is the same through her cover page, through her profile picture, through her various handles, she actually has maintained that consistency. So now we know color purple is her theme color. And even if you were to see this on a new social media that comes up, you don't need to be told that's Michelle Obama. It becomes easier and faster to follow them and to also see what they post. If you look at her profile, she's actually kept it consistent throughout the various social media platforms. I think I will really stop there, and I hope that I have been able to share information that may be useful. So we are 11 minutes past our time. I will step back and have a question and answer session. Back to you, Brenda.
Thank you so much, Nelly. I can see people are commenting already on the chat. So Joash is like, the phrase advocacy haitaki uvivu sinking in hard. Yeah, so it seems you need to put in the effort. Kindly post your questions on the Q&A, and if you'd like to speak and unmute your mic, just raise your hand and we'll be able to pick that and allow you to speak. Any questions or comments, kindly post or raise your hand and we'll pick you. That's if you're able to speak, and you can raise your hand and I'll unmute you. Mm-hmm. Okay. I don't know whether I should say going once, going twice. Yes, there we go. We have a question in the Q&A. How do we gauge engagement when people don't comment? That's an interesting one.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. So you either have it two ways. Sometimes it's really because it's a very new space, and so they really need time to sort of absorb and figure out how to respond or how to engage. And secondly, it could simply be that it did not really strike home, and so your communication did not get through. Was it the wrong audience? Was it the wrong message? Was it the wrong medium? Not necessarily because the content is wrong, but the presentation may not necessarily align or sort of strike a chord with them. So yeah, they may actually not comment because they were like, okay, what was that about? And that's a possibility too. We don't always get it right.
Great, great. So we reevaluate our messaging, or hopefully it's just new account that's not too popular. Okay, thank you. Any other questions? I believed was a very straightforward. I believe we've had a very straightforward presentation from Dr. Nelly and quite informative. I was also taking notes myself on effective advocacy skills, especially on social media. I think I've also had those moments where, hey, I didn't get a like, or I didn't get a retweet. So that has been very informative and valuable. Dr. Nelly, I think the participants will be able to share their feedback and any other additional questions they may have. I know they'll interact with this recording after this, and we'll be able to share any questions that we are not able to answer as the project team with further to you for feedback. So thank you so much for sharing this knowledge and for agreeing to be a facilitator for the young researchers. And we are happy to have you. Thank you so much. For the participants, thank you so much. For the participants, we continue to engage, and all those who are joining us, aside from the Young Researchers Academy participants, you can have this recording. Please join us in this knowledge networking and whatever we are doing in terms of sexual and reproductive health policy advocacy. We are happy to have this huge community reach out to us through our social media handles. You can also get us on nec@kma.co.ke. That's our email, nec@kma.co.ke. Sharon, I think you can post that in the chat so that people can capture it. If you want more information on any of these sessions and other CPD sessions, we are happy to engage. Karibuni sana. So I'd like to close at this point and wish you all a good night.
Thank you, Doc. Have a lovely evening.
Thank you, Doc.